just checking for the volume and everything.
Okay. So maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit, just a kind of a general kind of picture of who you know, name,
Yeah,
where you come from, where
yeah. I'm Rolf Wetzell.
you can just talk to me.
Okay. I'm Rolf Wetzell, and born in Shanghai back in 1935.
Yeah, just look at me when
Oh
you're
yeah,
talking.
back in 1935, and my father had come from Germany basically to maybe take advantage of the fact that his father was working for Chiang Kai-shek, and so he thought maybe the old man can open some doors for me, which he did. So he had a job with a big German firm in Shanghai, and I was born a German citizen, so I went to a German school starting, 1941 or so, and I went to school there, did my grade school years there, and then that school was closed at the end of World War II, and maybe a year later, my father, got me enrolled in a Shanghai American school, so which I was there in 1947, 6, 7, and 8 maybe. My father became befriended by an American officer who sponsored us for immigration to the United States. And so we came to the United States. I left with my mother and my younger brother. We left on the first day in 1949 and went to San Francisco. My father tried to stay back to maybe sell the house we had. That was unsuccessful, so he stayed. And then he went a little bit later in 1949, and he came directly to New York. And so basically we had to abandon the house. And so then, my mother and brother and I came across from the West Coast, and I went to school. I went to a high school in Westchester County, New York, Harrison, New York. And so that's now. Do you want me to am I sort of on the right track here?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, and then now, do you want me to go further in my life on this?
Sure.
or-
Yeah. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
keep going along.
Yeah.
I'll stop you when I.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so I went to high school there in Harrison, New York, and got accepted to MIT, went to school at MIT, got a degree in electrical engineering, and worked most of my career years were at Raytheon for maybe 30 years or so, from 1961 to 1992, at which time I hate the word retire, but I stopped punching a clock over there. In the meantime, met a lovely woman in Utica, New York, and we got married, got 2 children. One, my daughter Melinda, who's now 52, and she is married, a wonderful guy, and has a daughter 14. And then also we have a son Kurt, a year younger, and he's married to his wonderful woman. They got 2 boys, one 15 and one 13. So I think, sort of as a real quick snapshot, that's sort of. I have some hobbies. I love chess. I play competitively in chess, and I'm currently trying to write a book. I should use the word trying to. I am writing a book. Basically it's book for science for children, for school children. So it's on the tides, but that's just a diversion. It's basically a book on science, trying to get children interested in science, which I hope to get maybe done within the next year or so. So I think, Andy, that sort of cover that for a minute.
Sure, that's
Yeah.
great. General
Okay.
sort of back.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start by asking you. I'll start by asking you about your experiences at the Shanghai American School. We'll just start with that.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll go back and ask you more experiences about growing up in Shanghai and what
Yeah.
life was like back then and what you remember.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're going to get a little rain. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Should be.
I went.
So yeah, tell us about
Yeah.
Shanghai American School. What are your
Yeah.
memories of
Yeah.
going there?
Well, it was a good school. I was sort of a kind of a geeky kid, I think, and so I had semi-fit in, didn't really fit in that terrific over there, but it was a good school. It was a little bit hard for me because it was in English, so I went from a German school to an English school. I mean, excuse me, an American school. And do you want to go inside? Is this rain gonna?
It's a little bit distracting.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was going to rain so suddenly.
yeah,
Well, keep going.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. It's not going to
Yeah.
affect your.
yeah.
It won't affect the sound. of
Okay.
you talking.
I'll try to be more clear, more clearer.
Sure.
Okay, and so it was a.
Oh no, this is going to be. Let me just adjust this a bit. Oops. All right, that looks good. So
It's like
let's continue. So you,
Yeah.
so the Shanghai American School. Tell us about your
Right.
memories.
So, one of the things I remember is that it was somewhat challenging for me because of my language. I switched pretty quickly, but I think, right or wrong, my father actually advanced me an extra grade when I went into that school. So it made it a little bit more difficult. I remember from a personal basis, that was one of the, not shouldn't use only times, but my father was very helpful because I remember we were studying The Merchant of Venice, and my father helped me, and we worked together. That was sort of one of the only times really in my life that I was sort of close to my father, working, he was trying to help me so that I could understand it too. I participated in soccer over there, and it was fairly good. And I actually don't remember that many different things that I thought it was a good school, and I think I was there like 2 years, and they actually had yearbooks. I remember that. And to be honest, I can't remember too many other things.
Sure.
But that's sort of where I thought it was a good education, and I don't remember exactly what the math programs were at that time. Okay, so I don't know what subjects I had, but it sort of covers what my best recollections.
Do you have any memories of teachers that you had?
Yeah.
You don't have to remember names. But
No, I don't remember the names, but yeah.
What they were like, or were they American?
Yeah, that's right. They were mostly European. I don't remember any Chinese instructors or teachers, and I remember one that I think was kind of very much of a New Dealer type. Always talked about the AFL-CIO and that kind of thing, yeah, I don't know. You have some other questions. I can't recall too many other specific instances, Andy.
Sure. Were there any? Was there anything about the Shanghai American School? Because you were very excited. I remember when we went to Shanghai. We'll talk about that
Yeah.
in a bit, but
Yeah.
to try to find where the school was. So, what was it about the school that you feel like you have an emotional tie to?
That's a good question. I don't know if I honestly have much of an emotional tie to it. It's, say, compared to the German school I went to, in my grade schools. It was probably my first sort of experience stumbling along as a teenager. As I said before, I was a little geeky, so I wasn't really in the in crowd too much. So yeah, there wasn't really too much of an emotion, but I liked the school. I thought it was good. I struggled with my parents a lot because I always wanted to wear slacks, long pants, and they wanted me to wear the German lederhosen all the time, that kind of thing. So that was a little bit of a struggle. My brother was there too. He came to the same school also. Uh, so Andy, I think, maybe I revert back to your questions. I can't think of much else on those subjects that you talked about.
Sure. Um, Let me ask you one more question about
Sure.
the Shanghai American Soul. We could get back to it later
Sure.
if you have any more memories. But
Yeah, okay.
was there something in the values of what you learned there that influenced you later on in life?
Uh, Very good point, a good question. The only thing I really recall outright is, even though we were very young, right, it was only maybe 12-ish, that kind of age, right? And a couple of people talked about whether they were Democrats or Republicans, and so there was a little bit of a discourse about that I got something out of that. Uh, and I think the teachers were good, and they were supportive, and so that left a good impression on me. Okay, I don't know too much about values in general, but yeah,
Well,
good memories of the teachers.
well, you were a German citizen,
Yeah.
right? And so was there any negativity around that because of the war?
Oh, that's a
that
good
you
question,
remember?
and that's interesting. No, as a matter of fact, for some reason, they were picking on Italians a lot, and so I was delighted that they weren't picking on Germans, that kind of thing. But uh, no, there was very little of that. Very little of that. There was somebody who tried to be a bad influence on me in terms of teasing people, trying to get me to tease other people who were German and so forth, and I probably resisted reasonably well. But overall, it was that I was a little afraid of that. As a matter of fact, them picking on me as a German. They picked on me a little bit because I was geeky, but not because I was German. So I got depantsed a couple of times over there. So, but that had nothing to do with being German, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, did you have any? Do you remember any other students? Maybe not by name, but just their
Yeah.
personalities or where they were from, or any stories?
Yeah, not really. It's interesting, not really. And it's probably more my character. I think probably my younger brother may have had more experiences like that because he's more outgoing. I was less outgoing then than I am now. And so in that sense, there weren't too many good, not good or bad. Yeah, I just vaguely remember particular people or students and where they came from and all that. So, yeah. So I was really not that terrific in terms of making a lot of connections and so forth. You know.
If you were to give some advice to students who are at the Shanghai American School today, what would you tell them if you could see them, meet with them face to face? And
Oh wow, wow. Probably not much different than any other people in terms of what they have in life. In terms of trying to do reasonably well in school. I thought that because the teachers were fairly, what's the right word? The teachers were very responsive, or maybe not responsive, they were supportive. So that was very good, as I compared, say, with my later schooling when I went to a high school in San Francisco, which was much more, it was much more, what the right word would be, impersonal, that kind of a thing. So in terms of advice to students, I don't know, other than, of course, if they can, to try to, study hard and work hard, because the teachers seem to be supportive. Yeah. I don't know if I'm helping you with that, or that kind of thing.
I was thinking more like life advice, not so much in school, but like
yeah.
when you graduate,
Yeah,
you know, what do you tell young kids when they're just about to kind of graduate and get into the great big world based on your own life experience?
oh wow, wow, that's a tough one, uh,
Because you saw a lot, you know, when you were growing up there
yeah,
in Shanghai.
yeah,
You were there when the Japanese were occupying the city.
that's
And
true, yeah, uh, yeah, it's funny, I haven't formulated any real thoughts about that other than I've sort of absorbed what it was, the experiences that were there, so the life experience is probably not much different in terms of encouragement about the future than maybe anybody else would have. And here I know I'm not helping you particularly, Andy, but yeah, I think they were good years, and I don't, you know, I can't think of what, you know, if I saw somebody now, what I would say to somebody now, other than the generic, you know, the pablum of, you know, work hard and all that kind of thing. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to be ducking your question,
no
Andy.
problem.
Yeah,
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is you and your generation of students who
Yeah.
were there,
yeah,
you all experienced the Second World War.
Yeah.
Now, you were very young, and
Yeah.
you might not have a lot of memories, but you do have some memories of what it was like back then, what the world was like, the
yeah,
crisis that the world was in.
yeah,
And so that was kind of where I was coming from.
yeah, yeah,
You all
yeah,
came through that crisis, and
Yeah.
then you went on to live a very rich life here
yeah.
in America.
Thank you. Yes, yes. Yeah, I would say, yeah, there were a lot of experiences. So I'm thinking that's very different than, let's say, my grandchildren. In other words, that it was a more serious time, it would seem. You know, it's a more serious time. I was really, and typically not afraid, particularly afraid of anything. And I'm just trying to think, you know, I'm trying to think if there's any, you know, like revelations of good stuff that I recall. I didn't feel particularly threatened in any way by the Chinese. You know, that was, you know, I never learned the language, but I wound up playing chess and Chinese chess with one of my neighbors a lot, a Chinese neighbor, and so. Again, Andy, I think that, you know, I don't know if I have that much more to add. So
Sure, maybe you can. Let's switch
Yeah.
the subject, and if
Yeah.
something comes
Yeah.
up, I want it to come up more naturally. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have to think of like
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
formula, but
yeah,
let's go back to your memories of growing up in Shanghai. What are, you know, we went and visited your house
Yeah.
10 years ago,
yeah,
roughly,
yeah,
and you had a lot of memories. I think that triggered a lot of memories.
Yes.
Do you remember sort of what it was like to grow up in that house, and you know, what were some of the distinguishing memories that you have from that
wow,
time?
yeah. In that sense, I think it's probably like other kids. You know, it's just a house that. And it was like I was asking your mother what it would be like if she hadn't been. You know, so anybody would have kind of probably an emotional experience coming back. You know, as many years later as I did. But in growing up there, I remember it was fairly good. We had for a while there was a canvas pool my father had put in, you know, a canvas swimming pool which we had, and I remember like birthday parties, and so it was all that was fairly good. I'm just trying to think more of other experiences that I remember that my mother had in their master bedroom, had an air conditioner, okay? And if we were good, we could come and take a nap, you know, in the afternoon in that room, because there was only that one air conditioner in the house. And so that was kind of very interesting. A lot of lot of struggles with my brother. I have a younger brother, maybe 18 months. We semi got along, and in terms of other things in growing up, my mother was fairly good in terms of we were doing some parlor games outside in the yard when we were doing the summer, you know, like what color things you see and those kinds of things. Can't off the top of the head remember too many other things, Andy.
How, what do you remember, what was your first kind of memory of the war breaking out, or kind of news about that there was a war going on, that Germany was involved, and
Yeah.
Japan, and then later
Yeah.
the US, and
Well,
China, of course.
I do remember very much, as a matter of fact, I think it was only probably 4 or 5, my parents discussing that, you know. My father basically trying to say that this war will be over very soon, and then even I remember the outbreak, the invasion of Russia, which was in 41, I guess. I was just barely 6. I remember distinctly my parents talking about that, and it was a little ominous because you could tell that it wasn't a black and white simple thing. It's going to be over in a few months, even though they sort of said that, but you can tell from the meta talk that it may not be. It was at that time, though, we also went to Germany for a short visit, or maybe it was, no, as a matter of fact, that was at the outbreak of the war. I remember a particular incident in Berlin when we were staying with my grandparents, that there was an air raid, and actually a British air raid. And I do remember telling my mother, I was up in the attic, that everything would be fine. I'd be fine up here in the attic, you know, because they took me right down to the basement, right, because it was an air raid. I do remember that, and in that same visit, that was maybe 6-month visit or so, my grandfather, I remember specifically getting sort of you know, I don't know what kind of a spanking I got, but I barged into his office without announcing myself, and so I got a spanking that I remember. Let's put it that way, from my grandfather. But no, those were all in Germany now, right, in 1940 or so. And now going back to Shanghai, I was aware, and I knew it was serious business, and of course in the school, it was pretty soon they were talking about it, and they had a few movies, propaganda movies and so forth. I remember that. And later in the war, I remember in the school, they had like a big map of Germany and Russia and everything, and then they had like a string with pins, you know, so you could, you know, they could know where the front was all the time. But then as things got worse, I remember distinctly, they stopped showing that particular map and all the front lines as Russia started and the Americans, you know, beat back the Germans. So I do remember that, and I knew it was fairly serious stuff, and but it was kind of surreal because of the fact that you know, we were, whatever it is, 5,000 miles away. I remember my mother being particularly worried about, as I was going to turn 10, I think is when they started the Hitler Youth. You know, you have to join the Hitler Youth, and you have this big belt with a swastika on. And my father said that I wasn't going to wear that belt. And my mother was very worried about that because she thought, you know, somebody from the SS or somebody, there's going to be problems, right? So fortunately, that never really came to pass because the war was over before, you know, anything serious happening along that line. So I guess I knew it was serious stuff. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
You were in Shanghai. I remember you told me when we were visiting your house about some memories you had of Japanese soldiers and shooting,
Yeah.
target practice and stuff in your neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I remember two things now. My brother corrected me, which was surprising because he was younger than I was. Well, first of all, I could tell that the subtext, or that you don't want to fool with the Japanese. I remember we were out sort of in the countryside, and then there was somebody who apparently smuggled some rice without paying some dues or taxes. And I remember the Japanese guy with the bayonet telling him, that they had to go into some crawl space. It was some kind of punishment. I don't know how long they were there or what. And at the end, and one time when I was with my father riding a bike, he all of a sudden there was a Japanese soldier had a bayonet right at his throat, and my father said, Doitsu desu ka, and he had his passport because apparently this Japanese soldier didn't know, right? It might have been an Englishman or American, right? So I knew this stuff was sort of serious. And then there was some shooting that I thought they thought there may have been some kind of target practice. This was very near, right behind our house. And my brother told me, no, they were executing people. In other words, I do remember, I think Japanese soldiers, and I remember people, visibly not that far away, so I think they were executing people rather than, I thought it was some kind of practice or something like that. And it was my brother that told me, and it makes actually a lot of sense because it couldn't have been more than 50 yards apart, and they wouldn't be doing practice like that. So, but I was either too naive or didn't see, I didn't stick around and all that kind of thing. So, again, the subtext was there. I knew the Japanese were there, and you could see that whenever some kind of commotion happened in the streets, the Japanese soldiers would, very quickly, you could tell who was the boss, so to speak, and then everything quieted down immediately when the Japanese soldiers showed up. So again, so those are some of the things that I recall.
Okay. And you left Shanghai in 1949 to come to America. So do you remember what it was like to leave? I mean, you had grown up there.
Yeah.
Had you developed an attachment to the place, or were you really looking forward to your next phase?
Yeah, it's interesting. As a matter of fact, it's funny. I don't remember having distinct feelings of either joy or pity or whatever. And maybe some of that came from my parents. My mother never looked back, and she never looked back in a later time in life when she left her house in Harrison, New York, to go to a home in Falmouth, Massachusetts. It was like she never went back and never looked back. And so I think some of it, since my father was always busy, never really talked with us very much, so my mother made most of the influence on us. And so she didn't instill any of that, nostalgia or think about this coming back, or not too much of that. And so I just sort of went along and, sort of looking forward to America, that kind of thing, yeah.
And you didn't go back there for 60 years,
right? Right.
And so what was it, what did it feel like to go back there after all those years?
Oh, it was exciting because when you and your mother went and found the place, and then I realized for the first time, but possibly, again, this is maybe a boring story, maybe 5 years before your mother and you were looking at, there was somebody we spoke to. It was friends of my son. They were going to Shanghai. And so I got a map out and drew, I didn't know where the house was at the time. I drew the smallest circle that I could imagine where I was sure the house was in. I drew the smallest circle that I knew it would be in. And I asked them to find out if there was anything still standing in that circle. And when they came back, they said, no, everything has been rebuilt. So I more or less chalked off all of Shanghai, my experiences, the house and everything. And then when I saw your mother, for some reason, I said, what the hell, she was going to China. I might as well ask her too, so that was very fortuitous because I had already written off that it was all been, whether you want to call it torn down and rebuilt and so forth. So that was very exciting when you guys came back and actually had found the place. So so when I went, then of course it was very exciting. But then I would believe that would be the case for almost anybody who would go back to a place where they had lived 60 years back and hadn't come back in the meantime. So it was really quite exciting, going back there.
And what did you feel about the way China had changed in the past 60 years?
Yeah.
How was it different to what you remembered growing up, or what was similar?
Well, it's interesting. There was some similarities and some differences. Of course, the difference is huge because I knew that Pudong, there was nothing there when our younger years, right? And then, of course, it was very built up when we came back. But in terms of differences, I can't think of too many other than, of course, everything was really built up from the time we were there before. So it's interesting, Andy. I think that I didn't really, to be honest with you, it's only later in my life that I wound up having some serious original thoughts about things, So I went along. It was probably my German upbringing, you put one foot in front of the other, and that's it, right? And in that sense, I'm not trying to blame my parents. My father had very, very little influence on me because of his detached things, and it's somewhat, but my mother was fairly good in terms of, talking about things and introducing us to new ideas or so. But then other than that, I can't really visualize that too much is different. My children, this is off the subject, both Kurt and Melinda were very impressed with how friendly the Chinese people were, because they grew up where basically China was an adversary, right? Over all those years they're growing up, China was an adversary. So they were very pleased in how most of us greeted us fairly pleasantly and were very friendly.
Okay. So is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of Shanghai that we haven't covered?
I'm trying to think. Shanghai, yeah. Let's see if there's anything else that we haven't talked about. I think that I was okay with being very much a minority group, both in our younger years and of course when we went back. But I never felt ill at ease among Chinese people. My brother had a lot of problems with them. He had a lot of, but he was he's a very different person than I am. So he had a lot of difficulties, which I think were unfortunately based on not necessarily racist, but just from our background, different backgrounds. So I'm just trying to think if there are any other particular things in Shanghai. One of the things I used to do, now that I think of it, is that, and I was surprised that nobody ever really checked me, I would go quite often on my own when I was in Shanghai, maybe 11 and 12 years old. And I'd take my bicycle and ride into town and go to a movie, and of course I wouldn't tell my mother about it because I wasn't allowed to do that. So I did that quite frequently. Saw quite a few American movies on my own, and my brother never was really doing that together with me. He always did something else. So in a way, that was a little bit of a interesting freedom that I had, So that was one of the things I remember that in retrospect, a little surprising that my parents were not more aware of where I was, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah,
That's an interesting memory.
yeah,
So
yeah.
watching kind of American Hollywood movies.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Any in particular that like stand out in your mind?
Oh
in
boy,
your
I'm trying to
memory
remember
as,
now.
Like,
I remember, yeah, I remember some with, several movies. I forgot the titles, with, oh boy, Barbara Stanwyck, and I'm trying to remember if I saw, there were a couple of, Mrs. Miniver and some of those movies that I would go to. Okay, I can. Oh, I do remember one distinctly when we went with my father. My brother and I went with my father to this movie house. So incidentally, that it was really well, you were there. That I forgot whether it's you or Melinda or somebody stumbled onto the Grand Theater, which I had gone to many times, like I just told you, with my bicycle and also with my parents a couple of times. And they let us in there and let us see the. Let us see it. Incidentally, is it still there? I have any idea?
yeah,
It's probably still there.
so there.
The Grand Theater.
Yeah, we go there now and then.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to remember now what. Oh, yeah, the one time I went with my father, there was a movie called Commando Strike at Dawn. And after about 10 minutes of it, my father grabbed both my brother and I and dragged us out of there. Said, hey, it was just starting, because it was clearly a propaganda film where, they had, I don't know if it's SS or what, that were, killing people in Norway and those countries, So it was that kind of a movie. And my father, of course, had no idea what it was like, so he took us out of there. I remember that was an incident I recall. But that was the only of such incidents. I remember my mother used to say we'd go to a movie together. When we went to a movie together in like the Grand Theater or something, they would have these still advertisements, like, maybe the whole hour or so before the movie started. And I remember my mother always telling us to close our eyes so we wouldn't sort of wear out our awareness period by watching these stupid ads. So it's very hard. Somebody tells you got to keep your eyes closed, right? But anyway, so those are a couple of incidents I recall, right? Yeah. My mother said, although I don't remember it, when we were in Germany at the time in 1940, that we went to the Brandenburg Gate, and then she said something. This is later on. I don't remember that when I was 4, but she told me, like 20 years ago, that she told us to take a good look because we might not come back and we might not see it again, which of course turned out not to be true, because I went to Europe once with my wife Jerry and my mother, and of course we went to see Brandenburg Gate. So boring. So that's sort of I don't know if you had other thoughts and questions you had, Andy, on that.
Well, I want to get back to. I want to kind of make my way back to the Shanghai American School and the connection.
Yeah.
To, I mean, why did your parents choose that school, and were they thinking about like migrating to America at that point after the war ended?
Okay, a good question. I, of course, never discussed those things. He didn't tell us that, but that clearly must be the case. So my father, particularly my father, and my mother, to a lesser degree, were aware that education is a big deal, right? Education is a big deal, and it must be that I knew Shanghai American School was very expensive. I did know that, and so I clearly got the impression that they wanted us to get as educated as possible. After the war was over and they closed the German school, I had for a while. There were a couple of teachers from the German school that ran, like schools out of a couple of garages. Okay, and then we'd have 10 or 20 kids in a garage and a couple of teachers. So of course my father signed us up for that and got us into those. And then I'm sure that my father was aware of that and maybe was partly angling to get to America. And this, I think I mentioned before, is where he became befriended by an American officer, and I think it was an Army officer, that then sponsored us to come as immigrants to the United States. So yeah, and I think Shanghai American School, I felt, was a big deal. In other words, it was about the best we could do, in terms of getting good schooling. Not because they weren't good, but first of all, there was no choice. There wasn't really a German school anymore, right? So, as a matter of fact, in retrospect, it's interesting that the Allies closed the German school, and I never really thought about it too much. In retrospect, it's interesting. It didn't seem like it would be a typical policy that the Allies would do that, right? But that's beside the point. They closed the school, and so we had to do something else. So again, the Shanghai American School was a big deal. It was expensive. I knew it was a good school to go to, at least my parents told me, and I felt I got a very good education while I was there, during the years I was there.
Did it prepare you well for transitioning to a life in America?
Oh, sure, I think so, because, first of all, because English, we were speaking English, right? And then, as I said, my father tried to help me along, knowing I was a little bit behind in that, and so, yeah, it was very good, and, I did well in the schools once I came to America, right? And partially, I'm sure without the Shanghai American School, it would have been I wouldn't have been as good, that kind of a thing. So, and again, I'm trying to think. It would be go back there. I don't know if it would mean that much to me, because I only vaguely remember it's a brick building, I guess, right? We still talking. We don't know for sure if it's the same building yet, right? But so it was good, and I thought the students were pretty good, pretty friendly, and not prejudiced against the Germans. So it was pretty good. All I know is pretty good.
Now, you just spoke earlier when you were talking about the Shanghai American School. You spoke about how people were talking. There was a discourse about Republicans versus Democrats.
Yeah.
You said one of the teachers was a New Dealer and talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
So would you say that part of the value system in the school back then was about a democratic society?
A little bit, yeah. I don't know if I go that far saying that was a general thing, because I remember only really one teacher that did a lot of that talking. The rest of them, was just sort of the basic business of learning, whether it's mathematics or what. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of that you said. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And did that help you prepare for, being a citizen in the U.S.?
I think so. I think it helped some, yeah. I think it really did help some, right, yeah. It's interesting. I would sort of wonder if you had interviewed my brother, what he would... what kind of experiences he would have expressed, okay? But yeah, I think it was a good stepping stone, in terms of education. And again, I'm trying to remember. I don't know for sure how long I was there. Well, clearly I was out of there by the last day of '48, So that was kind of the last. So I think maybe we started late '46 or something like that. So I was maybe 2 years, right? Yeah. I was at school for 2 years. So I'm trying to remember the grades. Okay. Oh, I remember one thing. Oh yeah, I went back. Oh boy, when I came to San Fran, I went back 6 months. I went back. My father suggested that, which was a good move. And I was 10th grade. I'd have to think about a little bit what grades they were, when I was in the Shanghai American School.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got to change the battery.
Yeah,
so
oh, sure.
I'll let you
think
about that for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
But,
sure. So if you, to be able to help him, what is it that he can tell me what the group activities are going to be, or...
If he wants to get in touch with me, you can just give me, give
okay.
him my email.
Oh, that's okay. You let him do
no
it.
problem.
Oh, that's
I'm happy
wonderful.
to give him some advice.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
So okay, we were getting back to SAS because
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of share your story with some of the folks at SAS, and we're collecting stories about alums from that period, and trying to build some meaningful connections because, as you know, the school shut down after '49, and then it didn't open again until 1980. So it's almost like it was a different school, but
Oh
it
yeah,
has
I
that
never thought about that. It makes sense
legacy.
because the communists came in and
Yeah,
they sort of closed the school down,
it
right?
basically shut down after
Yeah.
'49.
Yeah.
So we're trying to draw some continuities
Yeah.
between the culture and the
Oh
mission
yeah.
of the
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
and what it was prior to 1949. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's why I
Yeah.
was asking you about values and also, if you
Yeah.
had a message for the students. But I was also wondering if you might have a message for like the administrators or, you know, the leaders of the school in terms of what that school meant, why it's such an important school, what it meant to you as somebody
Yeah.
who even for two or 3 years was
Yeah.
there. But it seems like it made a real difference in your life in
Yeah.
terms of helping prepare you for a life in the U.S. and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to kind of wreck this interview by saying that in my earlier years, it's probably maybe the culture, the background. I didn't have many original ideas, and I think that it almost can be in a parallel why the way Western civilization in the centuries in Tibet made more, made more special, when you would call it, progress in a way than the rest of the world. And it's kind of not necessarily the Renaissance, but the way the thinking goes. So in any event, right or wrong, I was sort of like a Mitläufer. In other words, I sort of, went like any kid and didn't think about why things were the way they were. So some of these questions are very difficult for me because I never really specifically thought about them at that time. But you are right. The Shanghai American School, definitely, if somebody told me to tell my life story and didn't tell me what to talk about, I would have definitely talked about it and said that it was a good period it was a good period for me, okay? Even though, as I said, I only semi-fit in with the kids, but it was, I could tell that was me more than anybody else. And so yeah, I don't know. I would have difficulty saying, okay, what's the bridge? What can we talk about that would be meaningful to somebody now about how things were being done at the time back then? I got the impression, because even though I was a youngster, it was a well organized school. I mean, it was that it was well run, and the teachers were friendly and they were interested in our education. That I could tell. They're interested in our education and so forth. But beyond that, it's difficult for me to come up with any grand thoughts, about what can we do here to make a connection, right? That kind of stuff.
Well, I guess, one question we could ask is, do you feel a connection with the school today? Like, if you went back there, would you feel like, hey, this is my school?
Yeah, I would be interested in that if I went back there. But to be totally honest with you, maybe not enough to make a special trip, that kind of thing. But definitely, if I was there, and you wanted to show me things, I'd like to stoke around. I remember there's a couple periods there during that time that they had like a, which I think was a gym, but they had stored things in it. I remember there was a basketball hoop, but they stored it. They used it as a storage place. And so we were in there. I don't even know if we were allowed to be in there. So I remember some of those kind of things. But I, of course, remember they had soccer, and so there was soccer teams and so forth. And I played in the soccer teams, that kind of thing. I do remember that. Yeah. And anything else that maybe you can ask me to think about?
Well, I guess where I'm going with this is just to see if you had any kind of specific memories that might be, or lessons that might be of value to people today who are in the school, but also, just where it fits into your own life experience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we kind of covered that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, when some of the other alums from, who were there at the school in the late 1940s, they gave a talk,
Yeah.
which I attended last year,
Oh.
and one of the guys is actually living in Boston.
Wow.
I was thinking of trying to find a way to introduce you
Yeah.
to him.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
now like, I guess he's a man of the cloth.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
But he had some good stories, and then Betty Barr, who I mentioned earlier, and then there was another guy as well. They all had interesting stories, not so much about the school, but about life in Shanghai, and then how they were taught about, resilience was one of the themes, like, getting through tough periods.
Right.
And how you learn to cope with really difficult periods in life and then get through them.
Right.
And have the courage and the resilience, because
Right.
courage is certainly one of the core values of
Right.
the school today.
Sure. Yeah.
Having the courage to live your dreams.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was sort of.
Right.
But
So-
if you don't have any specific
Yeah. And now, and
connections,
along
that's
that
fine.
line, again, because when I look at it honestly, we had a pretty easy going. I mean, my parents were well to do. We actually had servants, right, in Shanghai. So, in that sense, I'll be honest with you, I was never really put to any test, okay? I joined the Marine Corps later on, and I don't know how much all these experiences helped me or not, but and again, I'm not trying to blame my parents. I don't remember, having good talks about resilience or being steadfast, all those kind of things. But certainly, as I said, I can compare what my grandchildren have had over the last 10 years as compared to, living in Shanghai. It was more tense. It was more, aware that there's danger out there in the world, more so than they're feeling today, right? That kind of a thing. So I don't know how much, and we had, I can't, I'm trying to recall if there were instances in the Shanghai American School where those topics came up, okay? And I just can't recall all the stuff we talked about, I guess unfortunately it's just too far back. It's too many other things that happened between here and then,
No problem.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've covered enough. We covered a lot of ground.
I wish I had sort of more exciting stories for you, because in a lot of ways, some people always say to me, "Wow, you have an exciting life," But when you think about it, for example, that life I had in China and the number of different things we did, they're pale in comparison, say, to the experiences my grandchildren have had over the last 10 years, But that's a different story, because because the times are different. Their parents are more aware and they're more involved in their life than, say, my parents were in mine, okay? As I said, my father was I practically remember all the conversations I had with him, because there were so few. One example is, I remember we had, in 1943, we were out in our garden there, and my father was sort of relaxed, and he wanted to read he had a book about Napoleon. So he asked me to bring him the book about Napoleon, which I did. So that shows you, in other words, I didn't have thousands of these interactions with my father. I had just maybe dozens of them, over the years, right? So I remember that incident. Okay, they said, "Can you bring me the book from Napoleon?" Right? So I don't know, one of the things I gain out of this thing is that, that we sort of go along to get along, more than forging a whole bunch of original things on how to fix the world, right? You know, that kind of thing, right? Hey, Liz.
Hi, are you done?
Pretty much, we're wrapping up.
Pretty close to
Doug is
done.
here.
I'm drained. I'm empty. I have nothing. I have nothing else to say, right?
Okay,
All right.
Yeah.
because Doug is here to clean the house and